Good day. A lot of people like to put themselves in a box or put other people in the box saying, that's a liberal, that's a conservative, that's a far right libertarian, that's a far left authoritarian. I'm for freedom, so I must be left. I'm for freedom, I must be right. Well, is any of those things true? I'll be honest, I have been confused in the past, and I've put myself in the box of left wing more because that just seemed to be the cool thing to do back then. Well, let's find out what's really true, and let's find out if we can stop casting stones and take the log out of our own eye and see what's really going on here. So a lot of people have seen this image before, and those are the polarities splitting into separate polarities. So in life, there is matter, maternal, and antimatter, which is paternal. But when you take the maternal and you split it into its two polarities, we have, say, the sun and the moon, right? So we have those far polarities. And if you wanted to keep going, you could flip it again and take like the sun, which would be the masculine, be like, take the gases that and the fire that makes them come together, right? And so you can kind of split those polarities down a long ways, right? Well, let's split the polarities of the genders, which is what liberal and conservatism is. So the left brain, so in our own brains, we have a left brain, which is our conservative brain, and right brain, which is our liberal brain, or progressive brain, or traditional and progressive, right? So that's a good way to look at it, is chaos and order and progression and tradition. Those are our first places we can split off for the idea of, say, liberal and conservative. Well, when you split it again, you can see that the authoritarian is a polarity of the masculine. So the authoritarian, the way that the maternal or liberal authoritarian is communism, which we see caused 100+ million deaths. And an example is the Nazis, or some people will put it together as fascists. But fascists aren't just right wing. That's you can put fascism over here, and I'm not going to get into that in this video because, wow, what a convoluted word, and what a word that I think is starting to change meaning. All right, so back to the, I digress. So a lot of people would say, I even wrote that in here, is passivity is the feminine, and that's definitely the case. But I think in this case, I'm going to take the passivity and aggressive, and I'm going to flip it on its, because there's ways of being aggressive as feminine. So that's pretty aggressive, and there's ways of being aggressive as a masculine. Well, that's pretty aggressive also. Well, so a libertarian, are they right wing? Well, no, they're not. Libertarian is over on the feminine axis. And so when we look at we have the individual for freedom and libertarian. And if you look on the other side, it goes for is authoritarian, like control, group, and order, like making everybody the same, so we can all, this is for our group, or everybody the same, or for the other group, everyone the same. And a lot of people be like, well, then it isn't the far side of, don't you want to be the farthest away from communists and Nazis as possible? Well, even over in absolute inclusion, or these safe spaces that are being created, we don't know, because nobody's trying to even make any judgments or at all. So this is just chaos that's going to eventually collapse on itself. And so that safe spaces means you got rotten apples in there, or rotten apples inside ourselves. I'm not talking about singular people, but sometimes singular people that are accepted because it's absolute inclusion, that are actually festering and spreading through the whole thing. And we can see our society has become that, and where we don't want to make any judgments at all upon people or upon these things, and we can see what that's doing, because sometimes you need to speak the truth to people to send them on their way. It's the road to hell that's led by good intention, right? Well, if you go over to the libertarian right or the conservative or the masculine, they know how chaotic, if we're living in a free world and we got these two worlds that are coexisting, or the absolute inclusion world and the self-preservation, they're going to build their walls to save themselves from that chaos. And when you build walls in your traditions, then stagnation will kill you, right? So this is why we have to try to be in the middle. And a lot of people will be like, where does socialism fit? Well, a lot of people, socialists, they're all this left-wing socialists. Well, no. If we really understand what socialism is, we know that socialism does not work without capitalism. So what it is a coexistence between these things. So I see socialism as a very, if it's properly negotiated between the masculine and the feminine, then we know when we're over-coddling people with our social programs by making them weak, or are we just letting all these people die because we're not willing to help anybody? Well, that's, some social programs are impossible to get, and that's when our we don't really have any kind of socialism. It's more just like little social programs. But if we have socialism and it's properly built and negotiated, then it should work really well. But the communists killed all the true socialists back, 100 years ago when they were trying to make this happen, So where do I sit? I don't want to be in any of these boxes. Okay? If you ask me a single situation, I'll tell you where I sit in those single situations. Sometimes I do believe that aggression is necessary. If I am against some things that are potentially going to harm my family or myself, then I need to be very aggressive, and I will come over to this direction. I will stay away from these far sides, but I'll come over here. No, we need to really stay away from these in a single situation. I can tell you, absolute inclusion, that takes out of the situational basis. But in a situational basis, you can be just inclusive and have that safe space and know that things aren't going to happen, And there's times when we need to build walls, short term, not long term, right? So this is where we don't sit in any of this ideologically if we want to truly understand the world and understand ourselves. So maybe we need to stop casting stones on liberals and conservatives, and maybe we need to ask truly in our hearts, when am I being the dark mother, right? When am I being the communist? When am I being the dark father? When am I being the Nazi? I know that sounds pretty wild, but we have to think of these archetypes. There's dark archetypes in all of us. And so we can start to help people by taking the specks out of their eyes after we take the log out of our own eyes, right? We're not trying to take the logs out of people's eyes, because if they're not ready for that, they need to take their own log out of their own eye. However, we can share these videos like this, and we can teach people about what true true conservatism and liberalism is. Because when you look on Wikipedia, I look at the definitions. Liberalism, it says, believes in equality in individual liberty, supporting private property and individual rights, supporting the idea of limited constitutional government, recognizing the importance of relating values such as pluralism, toleration, autonomy, bodily integrity, and consent. Some of them sit more on the feminine side, yes. However, that's, to me, isn't right. And then if you ask here, what are the conservative principles? Well, individual freedom again. Well, that's a liberal. They said that was liberal. What the hell? Well, there you go. So individual freedom. The birth of our great nation was inspired by the bold declarations that our individual God-given liberties should be preserved against government intrusion. Limited government, the rule of law, peace through strength, fiscal responsibility, free markets, human dignity. Well, to be honest, there's a few of those you definitely can put on more on the masculine side or on the conservative side, but those are definitely ones I wouldn't put in the first polarity. So I wouldn't call somebody, because they believe in the rule of law, they're conservative or liberal. Well, no, there's people that are likely going to make more laws or less laws, but that's like saying if you're not conservative, you're an anarchist, right? So if you look at the actual polarities of what they're saying as a conservative principle is human dignity. The other polarity of human dignity is not good. Free markets, no, the polarity of that is not liberalism. These are those kind of things. And I think you can say, like, yeah, fiscal responsibility, you're going to see that the mothers wants to help more than the father. So you can definitely put things like that on the polarities. But even then, there's going to be situations where somebody's going to throw you a curveball, So don't ever put yourself in a box, and don't ever put anybody else in a box. And sometimes you can put a person in a box for a moment as pearls upon swine because they're not able to speak because they get emotional. You can box yourself off or put some short-term walls away from those kind of energies. That's a situational time where we can choose this freedom away from these energies. But don't block yourself off forever because of that decision, because that's ideological, right? We need to go with our hearts and live for what we believe in right now. And you're going to have feelings come up in your heart if you allow that space that will allow you maybe the forgiveness or more patience to bring somebody back in your life, And we need to know sometimes when we don't have the extra energy and we're not the overfilling cup. And we need to conserve and self-preserve. And that's why I want to have these conversations. And I'd love if any of you guys have any input or think I'm wrong in any way, please put it down below. I only want to learn, and I do appreciate anybody that likes, subscribes, shares. That helps get it into the algorithms and gets this out there. Much love and God bless.